After the end of World War II, tensions began to rise between the two global superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The world had just witnessed the devastation of a global conflict that left millions dead and cities in ruins. The war had ended, but the peace that followed was anything but stable. The ideological differences between the capitalist West, led by the United States, and the communist East, led by the Soviet Union, began to manifest in various forms of political and military standoffs. The world had just experienced one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, but the peace that followed was fragile. The scars of war were still fresh, and the rebuilding process was slow and arduous. Nations were trying to recover from the immense loss of life and the destruction of infrastructure. Amidst this backdrop, the seeds of a new conflict were being sown. The Cold War was not just a battle of ideologies but also a struggle for global influence and power. It wasn't long before a new battlefront opened in the heart of Europe, Berlin. The city, once the capital of Nazi Germany, was now a focal point of Cold War tensions. Berlin was divided into 4 sectors controlled by the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. This division was supposed to be temporary, but it soon became a symbol of the broader East-West divide. The Berlin Wall, erected in 1961, became the most potent symbol of this division, separating families and friends for decades. This is the story of how the world came together to overcome one of the most audacious acts of the Cold War, the Soviet blockade of West Berlin. In 1948, the Soviet Union attempted to cut off all land and water routes to West Berlin, aiming to force the Western Allies out of the city. In response, the United States and its allies launched the Berlin Airlift, a massive humanitarian effort to supply the city by air. For almost a year, planes flew around the clock, delivering food, fuel, and other essential supplies to the beleaguered citizens of West Berlin. This remarkable operation not only thwarted the Soviet blockade, but also demonstrated the resilience and determination of the Western Allies in the face of adversity. In 1945, after Germany's defeat, Europe was divided into occupation zones. The Soviet Union controlled the East, while the United States, Great Britain, and France controlled the West. Berlin, deep within the Soviet-controlled Eastern Germany, was also split into 4 sectors. Despite this division, Berlin remained a symbol of the fractured post-war world. As the Cold War tensions began to escalate, the Soviet Union wanted to ensure its ideological dominance over Europe, while the West wanted to promote democracy and capitalism. This rivalry quickly became clear when the Soviet Union imposed a blockade on the city of Berlin in 1948. In June 1948, the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, cut off all road, rail, and water access to West Berlin. This bold and aggressive move was part of a larger strategy to exert control over the entire city. The blockade was a direct response to the unification of the American, British, and French sectors of Berlin, which the Soviets saw as a threat to their influence in Eastern Europe. Hoping to force the Allies to abandon the city and accept Soviet control, Stalin's blockade was a test of wills. The Western Allies, however, were determined not to give in. They saw the blockade as a challenge to their commitment to the people of West Berlin and to the principle of freedom in the face of oppression. The blockade affected nearly 2 million people living in West Berlin. These residents suddenly found themselves cut off from essential supplies. The streets of West Berlin were filled with anxious citizens, unsure of how they would survive without access to food, fuel, and other necessities. With no access to food, coal, or other essentials, the citizens of West Berlin faced a dire situation. Grocery stores quickly emptied, and long lines formed as people queued for whatever supplies were available. The coal shortage was particularly harsh, as it left many without heating during the cold months. The blockade was not just a political maneuver, it was a humanitarian crisis that tested the resilience and spirit of the Berliners. The Soviets claimed they were responding to the introduction of a new currency by the West in their zones of occupation, which they believed threatened the stability of East Germany. But many saw this as an attempt to cement Soviet control over all of Berlin and push the West out. In response to the Soviet blockade, the United States, Britain, and France began one of the largest humanitarian operations in history, the Berlin Airlift. The plan was simple. If land routes were blocked, the Allies would use air routes to supply the city with everything it needed. C-47 transport planes, later replaced by C-54S, began flying into Berlin around the clock, delivering coal, food, medicine, and other vital supplies. At its peak, planes were landing at West Berlin's Tempelhof Airport every 30 seconds, delivering an astonishing 8,000 tons of supplies daily. The operation was a lifeline, literally keeping the city alive. The Berlin Airlift was not only a monumental logistical feat but also a testament to the courage of the men and women involved. Pilots flew in dangerous conditions, sometimes facing poor weather, Soviet harassment, and the constant threat of accidents. But their determination to keep the people of West Berlin supplied never wavered. On the ground, air traffic controllers and loading crews worked in sync to ensure that the planes could land and take off as quickly as possible. The airport became one of the busiest in the world, with planes flying in every few minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As the airlift continued, the Soviet Union found itself in a difficult position. It had hoped the blockade would force the West to surrender, but instead, it became clear that the Allies were determined to stand their ground. The blockade was not just an attack on the city, it was an attack on the spirit of freedom. The Berlin Airlift was not only a military operation, but a significant humanitarian effort that showcased the resolve and ingenuity of the Allied forces. It was also a public relations victory for the United States and its allies. The operation demonstrated the Allies' commitment to supporting the people of Berlin, who were isolated by the Soviet blockade. The Soviet Union was being seen as the aggressor, attempting to force the Western Allies out of Berlin through intimidation and starvation. In contrast, the Allies were portrayed as the defenders of freedom and democracy, providing essential supplies and hope to the beleaguered citizens of Berlin. The airlift became a symbol of resistance and hope for millions living under Soviet control. It was a testament to the power of cooperation and the human spirit's resilience in the face of adversity. The success of the Berlin Airlift not only alleviated the immediate crisis but also strengthened the bond between the Allied nations and the people of Berlin, leaving a lasting legacy of unity and determination. For almost a year, the Berlin Airlift continued. Then, in May 1949, Stalin finally backed down. The Soviet Union lifted the blockade, acknowledging the failure of their strategy. The success of the Berlin Airlift marked a major victory for the Western Allies, both strategically and symbolically. It not only kept West Berlin alive but also sent a powerful message. The West would not be intimidated by Soviet aggression. The Berlin Airlift stands as one of the most remarkable episodes of the Cold War. It proved that cooperation, determination, and courage could overcome even the most daunting challenges, and it reinforced the idea that freedom could not be easily suppressed. Though the Cold War lasted several more decades, the Berlin Airlift became an enduring symbol of the West's resolve to resist Soviet expansion. The story of the Berlin Airlift lives on as a testament to the strength of human resilience and the enduring hope for peace. From the depths of despair, a city was saved. The Berlin Airlift is not just a chapter in history, it's a testament to the power of unity, perseverance, and the will to overcome. Thank you for joining us in exploring the remarkable story of how the Berlin Airlift overcame the Soviet blockade. Remember, history teaches us that no matter how great the challenge, the will to overcome can make all the difference. Subscribe to Epic for more history and documentaries.